So fingers crossed.
Well, I don't have a
Yeah, it went so well last year.
Yeah, I think so.
There's no 2-minute, but
You actually have to click in it and then make sure you do that. And then,
but that's not 2-minute. That's just about to begin. I'll give it 1 more minute. Let me give this to Mike, and then I'll do that. Hi. I'm gonna take that too. So that was
Hello, hello. Okay.
So just so you know, since we're Craig will be standing right here when you're ready for him with his panel. So
Okay.
this way we'll introduce them on stage.
Perfect. And so I'm just going to let Courtney drive the.
Oh, Courtney's gonna pick.
You can drive that until you, and then we can just get.
Yeah. And then you guys are gonna stand right up here. So I'll introduce. So I'm gonna do a voice of God introducing you. So I'm just gonna right now say we're about to begin, and then we'll give it like 1.5 minutes, and then I'll introduce you. All right. Here.
Maybe yesterday. Yeah, they didn't. I mean, again, we realized when you know like the logistics of actually running everything else. Really? Oh my God.
Just puts up signs. Robin puts up like.
We were much more low tech.
Please take your seats. Our program is about to begin.
But our audience is loud services.
Please take your seats. Our program is about to begin.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Please welcome Mike Gridley, Managing Director and Partner, Acadian Ventures, and Courtney McCrae, Managing Director, WeatherGauge Capital.
So we are here to welcome you to the second annual RAISE Conference. Thank you all for joining us. We're just going to do a little bit of administrative matters up front. And the first thing is if you could mute your cell phones for the guests. And then also if we could try and keep the aisles open, that would be very helpful. As we have done in the past, our key goal here is to have really candid conversation and to have presenters be able to be very blunt and open. And as such, we have a couple of rules of the road, if you will. So the first rule is keep the trust. If we could try and keep the information that is presented today kept confidential. So if you want to blog or write about anything that's been said, just ask for permission first. And then be present. Nobody likes to be presenting to an audience full of people on their cell phones. So, and then third thing is keep it real. So building a business from scratch is hard, and let's talk about the hard stuff and leave the self-promotions at home. So thank you guys all for coming. And we want to thank our producers. Acadian has been a core architect of this event, as has Core Venture Group, First Republic Bank, Top Tier, and our firm Weather Gauge Capital. And with that, I will pass it over to Mr. Gridley.
Thanks, Courtney. Great to see so many familiar faces here today. We're very excited at the second annual Raise, and this wouldn't be possible without the support of our sponsors. So first and foremost, just want to run through a few of these folks. Cooley, which is going to be moderating a panel, but all of these sponsors, the whole notion of Raise is we've been doing this now in our second year, is to have a not-for-profit, in the sense that we're just trying to cover the costs. We've personally, as a firm, Acadian, worked with all of these sponsors, and this is a lot of the blocking and tackling, things that are really important for you to have as a fund manager. And Cooley, obviously, first and foremost, is your legal. You need to actually have a fund set up. Costello and Sons and Chubb for insurance. Crunchbase and Preqin, we're going to pull up some data that they've provided for us, but great sources of data on both the fund side and on the LP side. Rimmerman, which does your back office and accounting. Merrill Lynch, hopefully you'll be dealing with them on the venture services side when you have an IPO and your companies go public. And then last but not least, Standish, which is outsourced back office management. So we've got a great group of sponsors. You'll see them floating around here today. Wi-Fi access, PT events, strategy. So you should have Wi-Fi. The reception isn't so great here for 3G. And one of the things that we talked to our sponsors about was giving a brief snapshot and overview today of who's actually attending and who's backing first-time funds and spin-out funds. This is some data that Preqin pulled up using the attendee list today, and you'll see a lot of the usual suspects: endowments, foundations, private equity fund of funds, government agencies, asset managers, family offices. The data on the right-hand side is actually the number of known commitments made to first-time VC funds. This is interesting in the sense that this is all FOIA-related information. It's all publicly disclosed. And endowments, foundations, private equity fund of funds, which we have representatives from each of those categories on the next panel, are the most active. Family offices, we actually have a panel later this afternoon on how to navigate the family office environment. And something that's interesting that comes up here is I would actually probably put them, just based on anecdotal evidence, almost at the top of the list, but they rarely, if ever, disclose the funds that they're investing in. So there's not a lot of information about who they are and what they're investing in. We just know from personal experience and hundreds of funds we've worked with that they're very active in the sector. So it's a great group of folks. Crunchbase went through our attendees here, and we're in great company. There's a lot of great funds here today, both established funds and new funds. So we're very excited to have some really good conversations. You may see your name up there. You should see your name up there if you're a GP. And you're all in Crunchbase. Here's a list of vintages of brand new funds that have started last year, 2016, and 2017. Some funds that have just started this year. You're going to hear a number of the tales from the trenches later on today. We have some managers that have either in the market currently raising or just came off the road from fundraising, and we're looking forward to those conversations. And without further ado, I want to introduce our first panel, the LP Reveal. Craig Douchy is going to be moderating, and he is an attorney that needs almost no introduction. He's probably forgotten more about venture than I've ever learned about venture. He's been doing it a long time, involved with over 350 funds in their fund formation. He's head of the venture capital group at Cooley, and he's going to be kicking off the panel today. So I won't steal his thunder, and I'll let him introduce it.
Thank you, Mike. So I think what I'd like to do is ask each of our panelists to say something about themselves as they walk by, and who they are, and then we'll start asking questions. So Trey.
Good morning, everyone. Trey Hart from Northern Trust. I guess this is my introduction, but I don't know what to say. My oldest's third birthday was 2 days ago, so we're still living that down. And for Samira Kaji at First Republic, it's not sent her birthday gift yet. So if anybody has good ideas for a 3-year-old or suggestions on a Power Wheel, let Samir know, and let him know on his Amazon Prime account, actually. So thank you.
Okay, who's next? Josh is next.
Hi, I'm Josh Puma. I work at UC Berkeley's endowment. We manage a pool of capital that's $1.7 billion and invest across alternative asset classes, including venture. We have a small team in San Francisco. We make investment sizes of 10 million on the low side to, this is in privates, to 20 to 25 million on the high end. And we have a generalist team, so I don't specialize in venture, but rather spend my time across venture, hedge funds, and other private equity strategies.
Great. Looks like Chris is next.
Hi, I'm Christopher Vogt. I'm the Director of Equity Strategies at the Margaret Cargill Foundation, which is a large US-based foundation in Minneapolis. Margaret was the granddaughter of the founder of Cargill. She was never married, had no children, so she owned 17% of Cargill when she passed away. It makes us one of the largest foundations in the US, top 10 in size, but we also are unique because we're relatively brand new, having been formed just several years ago. As equity strategies, I invest in all equities globally. That's public all the way through index to active to hedge funds to privates as well. On the venture capital side, we're committing roughly 40, maybe 50 million a year. Typical bite sizes are 20, 25. They've been bigger, and they're certainly a lot smaller as well. Recently, we've taken on the focus to invest in smaller managers. So we've written checks as small as 6 million.
Eric Wu.
All right, great, welcome. Good morning, I'm Eric Wu with Top Tier Capital Partners. We're a venture capital focused fund of funds. We have actually 3 distinct platforms. We focus on core flagship venture names as well as secondaries and co-investments, and we also have a dedicated program just for small emerging managers. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So perhaps we can start off with just general state of the market. For you all, I'll start with Trey's. 2017 been more active, less active, about the same as 2016? And you might also mention how microcaps fit into the overall market as you're seeing it. Trey?
Sure. Thanks, Greg. And thanks to the sponsors for having us all this morning. So, in answer to your question, 2017 has definitely been a slower year, simply because I think in relative sense, 2016 was such a busy year. Where $40 billion was raised, which is the most in a decade, and I think that you're seeing both in the micro VC seed space or fund sizes under $100 million, fewer of them being raised right now, and mostly because folks are raising sophomore funds, and I think we're seeing less press and we're seeing fewer of them raising, not because there are fewer of them being created, but most of them are raising subsequent funds right now. And I think there's some fatigue. I don't know what relative sense of some means, but for some it's a lot, and for some it's probably only a little fatigue on the LP side of meeting with new managers. Simply because we're getting to a point, or have gotten to a point, where there is, I think, for many folks, concern about the macroeconomic condition of where we're headed, and that if there's a recession or a recessionary period, that there's going to be so much that's unfunded and unrealized in people's venture and private equity portfolios. But venture is more acute to this than private equity, because in recessionary periods, people don't stop investing, but you don't have liquidity. And for the last several years, there hasn't been a push for liquidity. I mean, not that there hasn't been a push by GPs, but there just hasn't been liquidity. And so in the next year or two, if there isn't a lot of liquidity, it's going to be a very difficult period, I think, for GPs and LPs, and especially newer managers, where there will be the first thing that people cut. Because as always, there will continue to be a flight to safety And that isn't a positive thing, because the bigger, the safer funds, if you will, are already big and already in high demand. So I think 2017 will be a smaller year in terms of total capital raised than 2016, despite the fact that NEA's raised $3.3 billion just in the last couple of weeks, I guess, simply because there are fewer funds that will be raising. But 2019 will be, especially 18, will be incredibly busy years, because they'll look similar to the last 2 quarters of 15 and the first 2 quarters of 16.
Josh?
Given that we don't spend, or that I don't concentrate on venture, I don't have much to add on this one, so I'll pass.
I guess I would just make a couple comments. One is, it seemed like prior to August 2015, groups were coming back for capital much faster. It seems like that's really slowed in the past year and a half or 2 years. The other thing I'll note is that I think a lot of LPs, particularly in the endowment foundation area, which have mature portfolios, so unlike us, have a significant amount of kind of capital building in that portfolio. So they're over allocated because capital hasn't come back to them. Those portfolios are doing great, but they're 140, 150 or higher % of where they're supposed to be in their asset allocation, which is a problem for them. If they continue to make new commitments, that number gets bigger and bigger and bigger unless there's a return of capital. So it's a great thing because they own some of the darlings that are giant unicorns. But without that capital coming back, they have to go to their investment committees and explain, hey, look, we're super over allocated.
So Eric, you're a real specialist in the microcap space. What's your take?
Well, so I would echo some of what Terry was talking about. A lot of people who were active and aggressive over the last few years, they had this sense of, we're going to build this starter portfolio. So we're going to just make a bunch of commitments, get exposure, and then wait and see. So a lot of that first wave of LPs have now reached the position where, like, okay, now we still have capital, but we have to wait and see around our existing commitments, because generally when you're making investments in seed funds, it's 2 cycles. At least for us, philosophically, that's how we think about it. So the dilemma as we think about the current environment is we have existing relationships, we want to mentally save those allocations, but yet we still want to be active in the market. So it's, I would say, for people who have approached this space in an aggressive way, we're in that awkward period of, as you say, whether it's overallocated or slowing down. But the good news is there are people like Terry, there are people like endowments who are now finally comfortable, having seen maybe the first wave of fund-to-funds or some of the more aggressive endowments take action in this space, and now they will be, I think, a fresh supply of capital.
Thank you. So let's go to a question that certainly I'm curious about, which is the funnel, which is how many funds will approach you this year? How many funds will you actually have meetings with? And finally, how many funds will you actually invest in? So some sense of how that looks inside your organization. Josh, do you want to start?
Sure. And I would say that some of what we do is reactive in filtering what comes to us, and then some of what we do is proactive in terms of going out and specifically looking at specific strategies and meeting managers. Of the more reactive inbound, I would say I get 350 to 400 inquiries a year. Amongst those, I'll take perhaps 80 meetings. And of the more active outbound, there's probably more in the way of meetings where I'll do 120 a year, and you take that together, and we'll make four new investments a year, roughly. So,
Chris, what are you seeing?
I would actually say much lower numbers. I don't know if it's because we're not based here, but I would say in general, I'll meet with maybe 10 to 20 managers in a year. We'll probably be approached by triple that number, maybe more. We decline a lot of meetings if it's not in our immediate work kind of strike zone. If it's not right there, we just don't have time on it, or we'll look at the schedule in terms of when they want to close or do a final close, and often it's not there. I have one analyst And I have a $3.4 billion portfolio across public, private. Yeah, I hear snickering. It's okay. Trust me. I cry, you laugh. And I also rely a lot on my network. I talk to other foundations, I talk to other investors, and I let them help me to. We've also done screens. Below 150 or 200 million, but above 25, there's I think about 140 to 150 groups. So I also, I need to get the number up that I've met. I've probably only met with barely a third of those. And in terms of investing, we're going to invest in kind of seed or micro, maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 a year. And for kind of more mainstream groups, maybe 1 or 2 a year. We look to have 5 to 7 core venture managers total, and maybe that same number in just the micro side.
So Eric, I'm really curious how you'll answer this, since you kind of had the beacon out as the micro-cap guy at Top Tier.
So I would say philosophically, we like to take a lot of meetings because it's our best way of not only understanding the lay of the landscape, but it also helps hone our own pattern recognition. And so there is an activity around meeting a lot of new and different, partially to be helpful, partially to understand what's coming to market. But on a practical standpoint, when I go to my investment committee, we're really looking at any given time 5 managers. So whether that funnel is big or small, we're really spending time with 5, maybe 10 at a given time. So the key is, how do you build in the levers or those relationships or that engagement to get on that top 5 list for us? But it doesn't stop us from taking a lot of meetings.
Trey?
I don't take a ton of meetings, mostly because, the anxiety of having to turn everybody down, I guess, is something I don't like to do. It's the thing I'm worst at. I'm working on that, Craig. So
thank you. That would be helpful.
Thank you.
I've got an email template.
I say that because the problem I have with taking a lot of meetings is that there is a point where it's indicative of not knowing yet what you're looking for. And so I feel like since 2012, 2013, with the rise of all these seed funds, or whatever you want to call them, that there were so many of them, and it was really easy to take a ton of meetings because it was very educational. And we made like 4 commitments in 4 years at seed. And so when I was thinking about that, I was like, boy, I wasted a lot of time. But actually, I didn't waste any time, because it was really educational about what we didn't want to do as much as what we did want to do. And so from that focus came, I think, a lot more clarity in what we wanted to do. And so from that, you then say, okay, well, you had 300 meetings in 3 years. Then what are you going to do about that? It sharpened a focus so that those people we do follow, even if we didn't make a commitment, there are fewer of them, because there was some signal that came from that. I don't want to say noise, because that's a lazy analogy, but there was signals that came from that about who you wanted to spend more time with, because there were so many of them that if you stood out, even if you didn't make a commitment, it made it easier to spend time with people. And most of that came down to the non-economic, non-quantitative reasons why you wanted to spend more time with people, either because they were, and more often than not for me personally, it's because they were dissimilar from me. And that was a big reason for wanting to spend time with people, because it's so easy right now in the micro VC space to make commitments to people very easily, because one, there's a lot of gratification that comes very quickly from that, and there's so many of them, and it's so easy to see yourself in other managers because there's so many. And that's the hard thing about investing in seed right now, as an LP, excuse me.
Great, thanks. So let's talk about kind of getting to that meeting, and I'll start really with Eric. So, kind of a 2-part question. One is, are there real no-nos in the marketing materials? Either when they send them in to you before a meeting or actually in the meeting? And then kind of a second question is, in the meeting itself, in terms of behavior and how the group asks, are there real no-nos that you say, oh boy, that is not a group I want to invest in? So kind of a 2-part question, the materials themselves and then the meeting itself.
So maybe 2 quick hits on that. So on the materials, one thing I always love to see is that team slide further up in the deck. Now, some people do a very good job at this. Some people somehow bury it at the end. They give you this, they paint this beautiful picture, what we're going to do, this market, and yet you have no idea who's driving behind the wheel. So that's also that's a kind of a practical advice. Talk about the team. Get that up front in the presentation, and then I've had people not provide their track record, and to me that's shocking. If I'm trying to find good investors, you can paint this beautiful picture around former operator, but your network, your strategy, your differentiated view, but where's the track record, right? So we have a mantra at Top Tier. We say, we will actually do first-time funds, we'll do single GPs, but we won't do first-time investors. So that's two things on the kind of material side. On the presentation side, one thing that I sometimes come across is people will come in with a team, maybe 2, maybe 3 people, and it's really one person talking the whole time, right? So that's, if you're going to bring in people, everyone should be talking, we as LP should understand how each of those pieces fit in.
Chris, any
Maybe
reaction
just a
to
couple
that?
things to add. I totally agree with a lot of the things that he said, especially this last point of talking. I was actually in a meeting once where there was some other LPs there, and they had actually asked the GP to stop talking about himself. Because, and you know what he did? He continued to talk about himself. So I don't think the meeting went all that well. Certainly on track record, as you mentioned, not only track record, but also kind of, I'll call it accuracy of that track record. Don't take liberties with a pro forma. We're gonna ask for kind of a statement of or a schedule of investments. We're gonna look at every single cash flow. We're gonna do the numbers ourselves. So don't put numbers into the book that we can't basically tie back up if we wanted to do it ourselves. For me also, just kind of simple things in there like summary of terms and things along those lines. It's nice just to get kind of a quick look at that and to have some idea as to what's going on there.
So it's a one-pager, for example,
Yeah,
just kind of
exactly.
highlights.
Yep.
Josh?
Yeah, on in the materials and on summary terms, if there's a GP commitment in particular that is above market, I would definitely call that out and highlight. For us, that can be the difference between something that catches our eye, whereby we'll take a meeting or we won't, because for us, alignment is paramount. And as far as advice on the personal interaction in the meeting, I would say, vibe off the cues from the LP, and if they want to drive and bounce around, let them do that and drive the conversation so that they get out of it what they need. It's a frustrating experience where, from my perspective, I try and make it get conversational and engaging, and someone adheres back to the slides and their method of presentation. Chemistry can fall short in those circumstances.
Yeah, could you hold that question until later? Because I have my presentation I want to go through.
Yeah, exactly.
Not so good. Fred.
Okay, a couple practical things. One is there has to be some uniformity and collusion around data rooms. I think everybody should just use Dropbox and just uniformly. Don't use Intralinks, don't use OneHub or Box, because I can't fucking remember the password. And I'm like, you think I'm kidding, I'm so serious. I think I tweet more about Intralinks than I do anything else, because I can't remember the password. I have to change it every single time. People use Merrill data site. I hope you're all going to Giants games with these bozos that manage these data sites, because it's a horrible experience. So just use something super simple, right?
How do you really feel, Fred?
Yeah, I'm trying to give practical advice, but I feel like you all should be taking a list of things you hate when entrepreneurs do it, when they pitch you, and then remember those things when you pitch us, because having the teleconference without an enormous pin, which is a plug for Uber conference, not Zoom, but Uber conference. You should do that, and you should use Dropbox as a data room, and you should use PDFs. Don't use DocSend, unless you can save as a PDF from DocSend, right? Because I know everyone wants the data and which slides did you look at, and did you look at the team slide or did you not, and all of that. But we want a PDF, because we're going to forward it internally, and we're going to save it down, and we're going to review it on the plane, and I don't want to look at it in DocSend on a plane, right? So those are somewhat, I don't know if those are practical, but that's more mechanics-driven actual, I guess.
No, those are great tips.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just want to add one thing, is that the PDF comment is certainly resonates, because if you do circulate it, you have to make it easy for people to look at, and if it's not easy, it just doesn't get looked at. I just think, and then it's buried under 30 emails when I get off the plane, and I might not look at it.
Yeah, you'll get, like, if it doesn't open the first time, you just won't go look at it. It's like, that's right. It's like when you get to a hotel room and a key doesn't work, that's what it feels like when you get a data room invitation and you can't get into it. Right? No one goes back down to the hotel lobby with like a smile on their face. Try and tell them it's not a big deal, but it is a big deal that you can't get into your hotel room.
I hope you are taking notes on this. I certainly am.
Craig actually is taking notes.
Thank you. Okay, so speaking of marketing materials, in the microcap space, Chris, do you care if there's a PPM? Do you need a PPM?
I understand why there isn't a PPM. I like them though, and I'll tell you why, and I think you should like them too. One is just time efficiency. So for us, and I jotted down a bunch of things on, so our full-blown investment memorandums have a fund update, portfolio fit, investment strategy, process performance, kind of ESG-related section, highlights considerations, biography, schedule of investments. PPMs often have a lot of kind of core material or the actual material that we're just going to put into that. So again, from efficiency. The other thing is that if you don't have service providers listed, that's a call. Who's the auditor? I need a contact at the law firm, et cetera. So it's just from an efficiency, and I would assume that a lot of small VCs are either single GP or maybe one or two others. It's just efficient in terms of their time. I know it creates some complexity. I'm not even sure who does the PPM. I don't know. My hunch is the law firm does it. So maybe this is a plug for Craig and for legal work. But that's going to get billed to the fund anyways, and I know that creates some complexity. I know there's some variations between the LPA and the PPM that often have to. But again, cynically, I would think law firms kind of like that there's complexity in it, and so they have to fix it and spend some more time doing it. But I like them for those reasons.
But I would also add, if you're going to do a PPM, make sure you update it. There's a lot of times we get into the data room, we finally find that password, get in the data room, and it's like a year old. So that kind of throws it off.
So Eric, I know you see a lot of microcaps. What percentage would you say have PPMs of the ones who come to see you?
I would say today's the rate is probably half of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, half of them do. Mm-hmm. So, and I would also say a lot of the funds who, this is maybe more a commentary around smaller funds are getting more sophisticated on how they build their LP base. So they also understand, I've got to, maybe get a fund one up and running, and then I've got to have some conversations with institutional LPs, but it's really fund two where I really want to engage. So if they have an understanding of where they fit within that timeline, then those are the ones that typically have that PPM. It's okay, now I'm really going after the institutional LPs. I've got to have the data room. I've got to have all this stuff in order.
Opportunity for rebuttal.
Of course.
Okay. I hate PPMs or offering memorandums for a couple of reasons. One is they're generally written by the person with the most time on their hands in the firm, which is either your CFO or the partner who gets stuck or has the opportunity to do fundraising. And they're very expensive because they are generally written by counsel and then edited by counsel. You'll do the business section, they'll do risk factors, legal, tax, and summary terms. And then the business section isn't going to say anything because you don't want to update it. If you have to do amendments, or if you have to amend and restate the PPM or do supplements, it's even greater waste of your time. And it is a fun expense, and we shouldn't be paying for it. Because it's basically a CYA so that you don't get sued. And you can put all the shit that you want to put in so that you don't get sued into the subbook. All the wrappers, the blue sky legends, if you're a Bahrainian investor, no one here is a Bahrainian investor, so I don't care what the blue sky legends are for Bahrain. But all that stuff gets put in the subbook. And Cooley does it, Gunderson, Goodwin, Kirkland, all of them will do that, right? But the PPM is an enormous function of your time. It's also expensive. It's much more expensive to put together than the limited partnership agreement because to a certain degree there's a precedent for the LPA. You kind of plug in the names and you plug in the terms to a certain degree, and people want to play with the PPM a little bit more because the business section, you start creating graphs and charts and all of these things, and that should just be in a thoughtful deck or white paper. And then lastly, I would say about PPMs is that they're mostly for people that want to plagiarize their investment memorandum as limited partners. So they're perfect for junior people at LPs, right? That didn't meet with the GPs and don't know enough about them to write the investment memorandum, and they just literally will cut and paste because a PPM is kind of written like an investment memorandum for LPs. So FOIA LPs love PPMs because it's part of their checklist is like, oh, did we get the PPM? Because that's FOIAble. I can FOIA a PPM from Berkeley and get that. Now they may have to redact some things under the California law, but like, generally FOIA LPs and younger people at LP organizations love PPMs.
Just one point, you cannot FOIA a PPM from Berkeley. So that's like very, very important for anyone that is seeking our investment. There is certain information that we have to disclose, but not a PPM. And I'd add one. I'll take a neutral stance and say if you are going to go with a PPM, do not have the legal documents, so the LPA or the subscription documents reference the PPM. Because in my seat, I don't want to be negotiating both. The LPA and the subscription docs as our contractual and legal bond should stand on their own, exclusive of the PPM.
Great. Thank you. Some diverse views there. So Trey, lucky you. You're the next first recipient of a question. So let's turn to LPA terms. Chris mentioned that he likes to see at least one slide in the deck about terms. Are there particular terms that are hot buttons for you that you really like to see, or alternatively, I guess, don't like to see? Kind of what do you look at first, and what would jump out at you as something that would cause you to say, oh, I don't like that term?
Craig, let me answer your question with another question. No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you, Trey.
But it's somewhat of a...
Did I mention that Trey is a former lawyer? Trey spent how many years at Kirkland? 3 years at Kirkland Ellis. So he's very good at turning questions back to the question.
And the reason I'm doing that is because I don't think that the market, whatever market means, is that people should have a tiered carry. Unless, like, no seed fund that is raising a first-time fund or second-time fund should have a tiered carry. You have not earned it, right? Foundry doesn't have tiered carry. Union Square doesn't. Some of the top firms have only recently gone to a tiered carry. And then you're going to say, well, but if we do a 3X, we've earned it, right? Well, if you do a 3X, next time we come around, we'll renegotiate it. But once things get negotiated in a document, they don't change. And so Cooley and Gunderson believe that the market is 20% until you do a 2X net or 3X net, and it's on NAV, it's not on distributions. So you can get into carry and still have escrow clawback issues, which can become a problem if it's not done on a distributions basis, assuming there's no LP give back at the end of the life of the fund for indemnification reasons. I just realized this is super boring. But I know, you're always like, Craig and I are geeking out on this, but the biggest challenges are fees and carry. I understand the fees more so than the carry, but a premium carry for a $25 million fund that's first time or second time, or at least first institutional, is absolutely not market. And it gets pitched to you all by your GP counsel as being market. It isn't. And the euphemism of what is market just means that if somebody got it, you can get it because your counsel tells you that. And that isn't Craig's approach because he's a gentleman and he's thoughtful and he knows what market is because he is 50% of the market, so hence you are the market. But I think that there is a lot of, it's hard for LPs to negotiate this because of the fear of, oh, well, we just won't get let into the fund. Well, great. There's so many funds to choose from that, yes, if you are investing in Sequoia, they're going to tell you what the terms are. You're a term taker. But generally speaking, LPs are always term takers unless you're really big. And the fund is newer or, kind of on teetering on, the brink of becoming great. But other than that, I mean, those are the biggest things to stick out. When you do the slide in the deck, there isn't much on there. But to your point, people look at the GP commitment, although Steve Kaplan at Booth has suggested there's no correlation between the size of a GP commitment and performance. So I generally am looking at fees.
Great, thank you. So Josh, you mentioned GP commitment as something that would pop out at you. If it
Yeah,
was large.
that sticks out to us. I would also say, you can orient around what's market. You can also think about what's like practical and perhaps easy to give on. I don't think a pref for most micro VCs is market. I mean, you guys would know better. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I mean, to the extent that anyone's willing to put in a pref in the docs, like that certainly sticks out. That would certainly kind of differentiate you and maybe be the difference between a meeting or some engagement, whereas you otherwise would not have gotten it. And
Like an IRR hurdle? Like in buyout?
well,
Is that
like
what you mean?
yeah, like a minimum preferred return, but before carry goes to the general partner. And look, I mean, practically speaking, if if you think your strategy can produce 2 times net, 2.5 times net, 3 times net, you're honestly telling me you can't guarantee me an 8% preferred return. And if you really think you can deliver 2.5 times net, from your perspective, that should be a pretty easy give and something that would greatly distinguish you from other from the market at large. So again, like high level advice, think about what's like practical, reasonable, perhaps easy to give on versus sticking dogmatically to what's market.
So can I ask you about your comment on capital contribution? You said, a larger, presumably than 1% capital contribution would catch your eye. Is that 2%? Is that 3%? Is that
Well,
5%?
it's a one-on-one conversation, and it's very circumstantial to the specific GP raising money. But look, if it's a $50 million fund, and you're talking about a 1% commitment, I mean that's 500,000. If haven't you had like some element of success in your professional lives such that you have more to put into the fund, and what, from my perspective, what better use of your own capital would there be than your willingness to invest that and put that at risk against your skills and capabilities. And so again, it's one-off, but I would say at least a year's worth of management fees and hopefully more. But again, we're not dogmatic about it. We're thoughtful, and it's a one-on-one conversation around are we well aligned.
Okay, thanks. Chris, any comment on terms?
I agree with a lot of what Josh said with respect to the carry and that sort of thing. I actually disagree, though, with Trey, which is becoming a theme here after the last question. And insofar as I negotiated 4 deals in the past 3 months, and at least in 2 of them, we had significant influence on changing things. So specifically, again, this is somewhat boring. So, but I like to see a no-fault divorce in there of some sort. It can be at a super high threshold, but it's just, again, something that gives some comfort, I think. Automatic suspension of the fund for bad acts, things along those lines. You shouldn't have to have an LP or an LPAC vote if the manager's been arrested or something along those lines. I mean, come on. Would you invest? The question I love to ask GPs is, would you sign up for that? Do you want to put your money in something where if the guy is carted off by the SEC for securities fraud, that it isn't automatically suspends? Again, you can have some type of restitution of the fund if charges are dropped or it was a mistake. But and then other things, which I'm sure Craig might get a snicker at, but attempts to weaken or kind of take out a lot of things in indemnification and exculpation. So again, and I'm talking about things like not foot faults, but material breach of the agreement, material breach of securities laws, things along those lines. Again, what are you asking for? Think about that. And then lastly, I'll say, attempts that I also see in that same category to either water down or kind of ignore what I'll call the anti-fraud provisions of securities laws. just because you're not SEC registered does not mean the U.S. Attorney's Office or the SEC can go after you, in my opinion. I'm not a lawyer, but call the SEC and ask them.
Did you guys negotiate the economics?
I almost always leave, it's a good question, thanks. We almost always leave a lot of the economics alone. Now, I don't see premium carry in lots of micro VC, but I like to use that as hey, look, you do a good job, I'm gonna leave the economics alone. What I want is some protection around things like if things go really badly. I'm taking the risk, obviously, if things don't go well. I would love to see a preferred return, as Josh mentioned. That would definitely, I totally agree, that would set you totally like, wow, they're actually offering this. And then the GP alignment that he mentioned as well. If it's a super high GP alignment, I know the manager is going to be impaired far worse than I'm going to be if there is a problem in the fund.
So just a quick comment on the LPA stuff. So one thing as a fund of funds, we always take a look at the reporting cycle. So we have LPs we have to report to. So a lot of people write in 120 days for their reports. We always like to see 90. We've had instances where someone says, well, gosh, maybe 100 or 105 days. That's important to us as a fund of funds because we need those reports and we need to process that, and then we need to send our reports out to our own LPs. So that's always something we spend a lot of time. And maybe I shouldn't be admitting this, but I'm a softie, so I would disagree on the preferred return. Because if you think about it, it's a little bit like a mortgage, and you're compounding that preferred return. It's this interest that builds up over time. And yes, it gets a higher hurdle for you to get your carry, but it's also, I think, a detriment in the sense that you have most of these managers, they're scrappy, they're trying to do good deals. And if their carry is all back-ended because of the preferred return, to me, I want to be on your side. I want to help you get in business. And I think that's one term that we don't try to push for.
Good, thank you.
Hey, Craig.
Yeah,
Make one other comment?
please.
I forgot to mention self-dealing. I think in the micro VC space, there's lots of it, and I think that's okay, provided it's disclosed. But attempts, again, not to even disclose the fact that you're going to invest something that could potentially be in either conflict or problematic within the fund itself, you should at least tell somebody, tell the LPAC or tell the LPs. They'll get it if they know what they're doing in the space.
Okay, thank you. So a lot of times in terms of what you all are looking for in managers, these terms, TVPI, DVPI, kind of get thrown around, and those are just for those of you who may not be aware. So TVPI is total value compared to paid-in capital. So it's a point in time, it's a measurement. What is the value of this fund on an unrealized basis compared to the paid-in capital? Not the committed capital, but the paid-in capital. So it's kind of a point in time calculation. And then DVPI is distributions at a point in time compared to paid-in capital. Have I returned the fund, if you will, at this point in time? So Josh, are there minimum TVPIs you look at, some kind of hurdle you would apply to a manager?
Well, I guess there are a couple questions in there. Perhaps like one is what we underwrite to, and secondly, what we may have to see from an initial fund to then be supportive of a follow-on fund. And on the underwriting case, we tend to underwrite for this type of strategy to 2.5 times net. Depending upon the particular strategy and the level of risk, that might be lower. In the end, the DPI should equal the TVPI, and that's certainly what we underwrite to. And in terms of following on and supporting a second-time fund, there's no hard and fast rule. And frequently we're in a situation where there will be a DPI of 0. There will, because this is long duration investing, nothing will have been paid out, and then we're faced with the decision of whether we re-up. And the analysis that we go through is looking at the existing portfolio, really trying to understand how those companies are tracking, seeing them hit various points of milestones such that we have a sense for how the portfolio is coming together. Size discipline is important for that second fund. as well as strategy creep. You know, we want to make sure that GP is sticking to what they told us that they were going to do. So I realize that's a little bit of a tangent, but hopefully helpful color, because again, a lot of times we're looking at a DPI of 0, and that could very well be okay.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it depends on the strategy of the fund, but at least 2x on a well, it's going to be on a net basis, and that's important to note. Like, people should give you both gross and net, and should have cash flows to be able to walk through that. And that means you need to have if you don't have your own CFO, you need to have a good third-party administrator to be able to handle those things and keep good records of those things. Being able to, Chris's point about being able to audit even just cash flows to get the gross to net, not everybody does that, and that's like low-hanging fruit when you get started. To have a third-party administrator from day one who syncs up with First Republic, so that they can manage your cash flows and maybe do it on e-shares or whatever. But definitely need to be able to do that. But I would say consistently do over 2x net. And DPI is somewhat ethereal these days, so we're not used to seeing that.
Yeah.
But that means you have to go into and actually spend time on the underlying portfolio companies to understand the quality of what 2x, because everybody has a 2x fund right now. It's just how many of them do you have over what period of time, and what are to your point about kind of a quality of earnings and buyout parlance, you know, the companies are. Chris?
I don't have a whole lot to add. I would say, you know, we don't have a hard underwriting rule, but I would say 2.5x or higher. The DPI is different. I think we've done a couple of investments in the small VC space, and the DPIs don't even factor in because they've only raised one fund maybe previously, and it's only a couple of years old. So there's kind of nothing to compare there. I would only kind of draw the other comment that you know, remember, this is venture, and it's, you know, from our perspective, higher risk than LBO or growth equity. And as a result, we do need something kind of above 2. Below 2, you've now gone into kind of good top quartile LBO and growth managers, which are typically lower risk. So I think there's almost kind of a need for a higher return that's commensurate with that risk.
So we call our program Alpha Managers. It's really about generating alpha within this portfolio of small funds. We underwrite to a 3x net because we have a large diversified portfolio of established venture names. And if we're underwriting those to, let's just say 2x net, this has got to generate alpha, right, for that commensurate additional risk that we underwrite to. And so on the performance metric, we always want to have the managers that we work with, or the managers that come in, show us their model on how they can consistently generate that 3x net. So whether it's the right ownership targets, how much do you reserve, the valuation ranges that you're willing to put money into, those are all factors that we actually scrutinize quite a bit, because it's 100% performance driven, right? None of us would be up here and have jobs if it didn't perform. So.
Thanks. So let's move to first closings, and that's at least I think a part of the topic that we're supposed to hit today. And let's talk about the issue of how much should you have raised compared to your capital target before you can have a first closing. So it used to be that people would say, oh, you know, you have to have at least 80% of that target, you know, 5 years ago. And then 3 years ago, particularly in the microcap space, it became, well, you know, if you close on at least 50%, that would be okay, and not a bad signal to the market that you're closing on too little amount. Josh, how do you feel about that question today?
Sure. Well, what's behind that question, right? And from my perspective, it's what's the risk to me? The risk to me or to Berkeley is that we make a commitment and then ultimately the manager falls short of raising enough capital to support their business, and there's risk around the firm picture. So we're comfortable with an initial close that gets the GP to a level of funding that allows them to do what they do well, and to have the resources they need and the team to do what they do well. And if you can make a case to me that, you know, you can do that on 40 million if you're raising a $100 million size fund, yeah, fine. I'll make a commitment to and be part of a $40 million close.
Sure. So I would say we look at it a different angle. I always counsel funds to do a first close to give you capacity to do a few deals. Because we always love to say, take the theory into the actual practice. And so, even if it's a very small, modest close, but it allows you to do those first three deals in your pipeline, I say absolutely do it. Because the other angle that we think of ourselves as a value-added LP is we'll help you get some of your fundraise. So we're happy to anchor that first close and then go talk to our friends, make introductions, and help you get to where you need to be. So from a fundraising risk perspective, and part of it is because we are very active, we don't think about a certain number. We think more about your ability to execute. Trey?
I was just trying to think of a fund that we've done that we either was more than one closing or we did the final closing. So the sample set in the last 4.5 years has not been one where we, done a fund where there were multiple closings, or we didn't do the final closing for that matter. But I don't really have a preference, because if we're making a commitment, we would be happy to be your only LP. And I would hopefully, generally speaking, the managers that we're doing, that there are other people that like it too, and if not, we're fine being the only LP. I think the odds of that happening are slimmer, but we're looking at a fund right now that it's Roman numeral 4, and the GP has raised mostly non-institutional capital in the first 3 funds, and they were smaller, and the goal is to raise 3 times the size of the fund as the last one. And if we were the first LP and the only LP, and it was only a $5 or $10 million fund, we'd be fine with that, absolutely. And it's important to note that that's just one GP, so that's a little bit of a nuance. But to your point, if you've only closed on 40 out of 100, you got 4 GPs, that's tough. Yeah.
I don't have a lot to add. I agree with what Josh said. We want to be able to at least see transparency into that the manager can affect his strategy or her strategy with the capital that they're going to close on that first close. We're taking on additional risk if that's not the case. I was going to make one other point. I had mentioned earlier, like honesty is a theme that I kind of come back to. Is that I recently, meaning in the past 9 months, met with someone, and we had been tracking them and following them. They had a first close. They were planning a second. It didn't seem like it happened. When it did, we met with the manager again, and when I asked about pipeline, I just got a completely evasive answer. And that was literally like the end of it at that point. I just thought, this person's not telling me the truth. And if they're not telling me the truth now, God forbid our capital is committed and we're legally required.
So that leads me to another question, which is LPs do sometimes, if not all times, that's really for you guys to tell me, want to know who else is in for a first closing. So would you ever participate in a first closing not knowing who the other LPs are, or would you insist on the answer to that question before you would write a check?
We have a closing on Thursday. I have no idea who the other LPs are, and we're 30 out of a little over 100. I have no idea, and I don't care. As we're making a huge commitment to the GP, and I have great information about them, and that's all that matters, because I can't underwrite what other people are thinking. And I generally don't do other LP reference calls, because I have to, at the end of the day, trust the work that we did and our own intuition. But I have no idea who the other LPs are, not a single one.
How about you other guys? Would you close without knowing?
No. For us, it's pretty important. I sit on 8 LP advisory boards, and there are a couple instances right now where we're going through restructuring, and it's really involved. It's taking up a lot of time, and it's really important to have a sense for who's around me and who's on that committee and what institution they represent, because fund to funds have a different set of a different set of motivation than an endowment at times, because the model is different. So investors think differently. They're different personalities. So yeah, for us, it's important.
It's important for us. I used to manage a global hedge fund portfolio, which was a lot different because there was obviously liquidity in those investments, and so I would call that adjacency risk. In other words, the other LP next to you, if they're going to pull capital, I realize that's a liquid structure, open-ended structure. This isn't, but we do care about that. We typically want it in a side letter that will receive a roster of the LPs. as well as other things like what materials are handed out to the advisory board if we're not on it, and those types of things.
Eric?
So we always ask. No one's told us no. Obviously, there's nothing to hide on your LP base. If anything, it helps boost our confidence in your ability to choose the right partners, because there's a partners in that LP for a reason, and that's important to us, because again, if you're joining a board of a company, of course you want to know how that board dynamic is going to work out. The same way, we're on LPACs, LP advisory boards, and we want to understand how that dynamic is going to work. To the extent there's corporates or strategics on there, they behave in a very different way. As fund of funds, generally we are more collaborative. We're more trying to help you, again, build your franchise. So that's important to us.
Great. So we've run out of time, except we haven't, in a sense. I'm going to ask one more question, which has to do with what happens after the fund closes and what can go wrong with relationships between the GP and the LP. So Trey, I asked everyone to have 3 top tips for maintaining LP relations. Maybe we'll get down to 2 top tips since we're running out of time.
So maybe everyone won't disagree with this. So one, to maintain a good LP-GP relationship right after the fund closes, have a closing dinner, buy tombstones or lucite, which Craig likes because he's an attorney and his office is nothing but deal toys and lucite. And then 3, have good swag. So, the best way for us to advertise what you're doing is to wear your vest or your tote bag or your pen, but not moleskins. I think that I wasn't kidding. But to give you a better answer,
Thank you.
I would say just establish what the cadence of what your communication is going to be on the onset. To a certain point, what Eric said, there is a formality around quarterly reporting, but if you're going to have an advisory board, know on the outset how many times you're going to meet a year, /telephonically or in person. Have an annual meeting. So many funds today don't have annual meetings. I don't know why, right? You can't do that as a public company. I don't even know if it's legal under Delaware law. I think you kind of technically have to have an annual meeting, but have an annual meeting. Even if it's just 2 hours, have an annual meeting, because it's a great opportunity for us to see you as a public speaker and for us to as you guys mentioned, see other people in the LP base, so that when the fund gets restructured in 12 years, we know who to call and gripe about you behind your back.
Josh?
I would say, take a view of the true spirit of partnership in terms of the way you communicate, the transparency that you provide, and what you ask of your LPs too. So, as opposed to it being a necessary evil to raise capital and secure your fund, what more can you get out of those LP relationships? How can you maximize those? If you're thinking along those lines, it'll bring you closer to your LPs. You'll have better engagement. They'll have a better understanding of how you think and be with you through the tough times. And I think it'll just generally be a more rewarding experience for you.
Chris?
I was just going to say, disclose bad news, kind of as soon as possible. LPs want to know that the company that you invested in isn't doing well. If it pops up on Bloomberg and the chief investment officer of the philanthropy sees it before I do and he asks me, I'm not going to be very happy when I don't know what's going on. Likewise, any conflicts, like I mentioned before, with self-dealing and things like that, tell the LPs or at least the advisory board about it. And I totally agree with finally something we can agree on is the annual meeting. Hold an annual meeting. It's the only kind of proper one day that we typically will get with a lot of private funds to go kind of through a lot of materials. And I like the fact that you spend time doing it, et cetera. And so that's about it. Thank you.
Eric, bring us home.
So universally, if I ask every GP in this room, does your work start or stop when you make the investment? Right? Universally, you say, well, that's when the hard work begins. And so if you take that message to the GP-LP side of the table, we're unfortunately busy running off doing different deals. We're going on to the next fund. Use that opportunity to continue that engagement. And I would say the strongest endorsement that we can get about what you're doing is your entrepreneurs. Find an avenue, find an access for us to interface with your entrepreneurs. It reinforces what you do in terms of the value you add. It gives us a unique view on the market because we're talking to companies. Now, again, I know it's hard. I mean, they're all running businesses, but to the extent they're, closing dinners, we've had CEOs come to closing dinners. We've had, you do a quarterly happy hour, you invite a couple of your CEOs and founders. It's a great way to reinforce that message.
Good. Thanks so much. Please help join me in thanking our panel.
Thank you, Craig, and the rest of the speakers. That was a great way to start the day with a lot of provocative insights. Now is the time for the first of 2 breakout sessions. These breakout sessions were designed for you to be able to interact in a far more intimate setting and for everyone to get a chance to speak. And they were, in fact, the most popular format last year, so please don't miss them. We gave a lot of thought to who should be with whom in the breakout session. So if you turn your badge around, there'll be a number on the back of your badge. And there are 13 sessions. They will each be facilitated by a veteran fund attorney or veteran fund manager. So please don't switch sessions. And if you look at the back of your program, there's a handy map which will indicate where your breakout session will be held. So please go to them. They start promptly in 10 minutes, and we will resume the core programming track here at 11:50. Thank you.